At 10:52 on a Tuesday night in late August, Dara knocked on my cabin door and told me to bring a flashlight. By 11:15, we were standing barefoot at the edge of Crater Hollow Lake with the pines solid black around us. And I was watching the water glow, actually glow, cold, pulsing blue-green light, moving with the shoreline current around her ankles. She hadn't mentioned that part. The look she gave me over her shoulder made it clear that was entirely on purpose. My name is Jasper Weld. I was 29 that August, a structural engineer for a mid-size firm in Portland, currently on what my cardiologist had diplomatically called a mandatory rest period. In practical terms, that meant 6 weeks of being medically prohibited from checking work email, attending meetings, or doing anything that elevated my resting heart rate above 90. The arrhythmia episode had lasted 4 minutes in a conference room during a Q3 budget presentation. My coworkers had stood around looking uncertain while I sat on the floor and asked everyone to please stop talking. My doctor's verdict came with a pamphlet about stress management and a very direct suggestion that I go somewhere without cell service for a while. I found the cabin through a property listing. It sat in the Cascade foothills about 2 hours south of Portland at the end of a gravel road that a regular sedan could technically survive if the driver had low expectations for their alignment. The property had 2 rentals, a larger main cabin and a smaller guest unit sharing a dock on Crater Hollow Lake. I had the guest unit. The main cabin was already occupied. I met Dara Whitmore the afternoon I arrived. I was unloading my car when she appeared around the corner of the main cabin, holding a soil sample kit and a travel mug, looking at me with the polite neutrality of someone who had not been warned a neighbor was coming. "You're the engineer," she said, not a question. The listing probably said structural engineer. I prefer person who makes sure buildings don't fall over. That's more words for the same thing. It sets better expectations. She had moved in 5 weeks earlier for her dissertation fieldwork. She was 27, an ecology PhD candidate at Oregon State in Corvallis, studying a rare bioluminescent microorganism that bloomed unpredictably in a handful of Pacific Northwest lakes, including Crater Hollow. Her work involved water sampling, sediment testing, and a great deal of patience. The bloom could start any time between mid-July and late September. It lasted 3 to 5 nights. You couldn't predict it. You could only be there when it happened. Dara was not what I expected a field ecologist to look like, which I recognized immediately as a stupid thing to think. She had dark red hair she kept in a messy braid, a habit of leaning against things when she talked, and the particular brand of dry humor that comes from spending too much time alone in a cabin with data that isn't cooperating. We developed an informal arrangement over the following 3 weeks. Coffee in the mornings on the shared dock, her with a thermos of instant she brewed on a camp stove inside, me with the French press I had brought from home because some standards were non-negotiable. She made fun of the French press with great consistency and creativity. I made fun of her instant, which tasted like something recovered from a house fire. "You're supposed to be resting," she said one morning, watching me carefully measure grounds. "That looks like effort." Good coffee doesn't require effort. It requires attention. The distinction matters to you. So does not drinking something that tastes like a punishment. She smiled at the lake. It tastes like fieldwork. We talked about her research more than anything else because it was the most interesting thing on the property. She explained bioluminescence in a way that made the biology feel like magic without losing the science. Single-celled organisms producing light through a chemical reaction when agitated, turning the water into something from a dream. She'd witnessed it once before, in graduate school, in a harbor off the coast of Maine. "What does it actually look like?" I asked. She thought about it. "Like the water is trying to tell you something." I stopped pretending I wasn't interested in her sometime around the 2nd week, but I kept the pretense anyway. I'd spent 3 years with a woman who had decided I wasn't ambitious enough, too steady, too content with competent rather than exceptional. She'd said it nicely at first, then stopped being nice when she realized I wasn't going to change. The breakup had been polite and exhausting and had left me with a specific distrust of my own instincts. Living 12 feet from someone I was genuinely drawn to felt like exactly the kind of decision my instincts would make that I shouldn't trust. So when Dara knocked at 10:52, I assumed she had a practical problem. The door on the main cabin stuck when it rained. A circuit breaker had tripped her outlet twice. I had become the informal property handyman in the same way she had become someone I found reasons to talk to longer than necessary. She was standing on my porch in rubber wading boots up to her knees, a headlamp around her forehead, and a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Not urgency. Something quieter and more deliberate. "Bring a flashlight," she said, the handheld one. "What's happening?" "The bloom started about an hour ago." She paused. "I've been taking my samples." But I wanted. She stopped in a way that felt like she was choosing carefully. I wanted someone to see it with me. I grabbed the flashlight. The trail to the lakeshore was 200 yards through Douglas fir, and she walked it without her headlamp, which told me she'd done it enough times in the dark that she didn't need it. I followed, using my light to avoid roots. She didn't say much. When she did speak, it was to warn me about a low branch or a wet section of trail. We came out of the trees at the small gravel beach at the north end of the dock. The lake was a flat black oval, completely still, and at its edges, where the water met the rocks, there was light. Not bright light, nothing you'd see from a distance, but a cold blue-green luminescence that pulsed faintly when the water moved, when a ripple reached the shore, when anything disturbed the surface. It looked like the lake was breathing. "Oh," I said. "Yeah." Dara was already at the water's edge, working quickly and quietly, collecting vials, writing in her field notebook by headlamp. I sat on a flat rock above the waterline and watched both the lake and her. After about 20 minutes, she capped the last vial and stood. She looked at me for a moment, then at the lake. "Come in," she said. "I don't have waders. Bare feet are fine along the edge, only a few inches deep." She gestured toward the shoreline. "Just stay where it's shallow." I took off my shoes and socks and stepped in. The cold was immediate and total. The light moved around my ankles like something alive, stirred by my entry. I stood very still because moving felt like interrupting something. "It doesn't hurt them," Dara said, reading my face. "The light is just their stress response. They're fine." I wasn't worried about them. "You looked worried about them." I looked worried about standing in a glowing lake at 11 p.m. She stepped beside me. Our shoulders almost touched. The water barely reached my ankles, and wherever it moved, the glow moved with it. "I've been waiting 2 weeks for this," she said. "Longer, technically. I've been waiting for this bloom for most of my PhD. And," she looked sideways at me, "and I'm glad I'm not alone for it." I'd been careful for 3 weeks. I'd been sensible. I looked at her face in the faint glow off the water, and I decided I was done being sensible. "I'm glad you knocked," I said. She turned toward me. I almost didn't. I went to the door twice before I actually knocked. "Why did you finally knock?" "Because I kept thinking about how you'd look when you saw it." A pause. I was right, by the way. What did I look like? Like someone who forgot for a second that anything else existed. My heart, the same heart my cardiologist had monitored for 4 minutes on a conference room floor, did something complicated and entirely unambiguous. "Dara," I said. "I know." Her voice was quiet. "I've been trying not to. We have a month left and you're leaving and I'm leaving and it seemed." She stopped. "It still seems like a reasonable thing to avoid." And yet. And yet. She faced the lake again. "I'm not good at this part, the in-between part. The part where you like someone and you're aware of it and you haven't decided what to do about it yet. Neither am I." "You're very calm about it." "I had a cardiologist specifically tell me not to get worked up about things." She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and the sound moved across the water and came back. I reached for her hand. In the dark, in cold water that was lit from within, she let me take it. We stood there for a while. I don't know how long. The bloom pulsed around our feet, and the pines were a black wall behind us, and I felt, for the first time in probably a year, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. "There's something I should tell you," she said. Her hand tightened on mine. "Tell me now." She inhaled. "My dissertation defense got moved. It was supposed to be in December, but my committee has a scheduling conflict, and they've pushed it to late October. She paused. That's 6 weeks from now. I have to go back to Corvallis in 10 days. 10 days. I looked at our feet in the glowing water. And my advisor called this afternoon, she continued. There's a postdoc position at the Marine Station on San Island, Friday Harbor. She said it quietly, like she was testing how it sounded. He thinks I should take it. Strong program, exactly what I'd need to set up a faculty track later. Friday Harbor, I repeated. That's about 6 hours from Portland. 7 from here. Her voice was careful, neutral in the way people go neutral when they're bracing for something. I should have said, I don't want you to go. I should have said, tell me what you want. Instead, I said, you should take it. That sounds like exactly the right next step. She let go of my hand. Not dramatically, not angrily. She just withdrew it and stood an inch farther away, which on a glowing lakeshore felt like a mile. That was fast, she said. It's a good opportunity. I know what it is. I'm not trying to. I know. Her voice stayed even. It's okay. I just wanted to make sure you knew before, she gestured between us, before that mattered more. She walked back to her sample kit. I stood in the water and felt the specific kind of stupid that comes from watching yourself do something wrong in real time and doing it anyway. We walked back to the cabins mostly in silence. At the fork in the path where we went separate ways, she said goodnight without quite looking at me. I watched her door close and then stood on my porch in the dark for a long time, listening to the pines and thinking about all the ways I had just proven my ex-girlfriend's point about me. I didn't sleep much. At 6 a.m, I put on shoes and walked to the main cabin with my French press and a bag of the good coffee, the kind I'd been protecting all summer, and knocked on Dara's door. She opened it in a worn Oregon State sweatshirt with her hair down, holding a mug of the terrible instant. She looked at me, then at the French press, then back at me. You brought reinforcements, she said. I brought an apology. She stepped aside. I found her camp stove and made coffee while she sat at the small table and watched me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Her cabin was organized the way temporary spaces get when someone smart makes the best of them. Field notebooks stacked by date, specimen vials on a cloth, her laptop open to a data spreadsheet, a printed map of the lake pinned to the wall with red pen marks at sampling points. I set a mug in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it and waited. Last night, I said. I answered from the wrong part of myself. Which part was that? The part that has a rule about not wanting things I can't keep. She looked at the mug. That's an honest thing to say. The honest answer is that I don't want you to go. But I also spent 3 years with someone who made herself smaller for me and was angry about it later, and I refuse to be the reason you do that. I sat down across from her. Both things are true. I panicked and gave you the second one without the first. She looked up. You could have just said you didn't want me to go. I could have. I should have. Why didn't you? I thought about how to say it. Because wanting you to stay felt selfish when I don't even know what we are yet. 10 days felt like a small foundation to build an argument on. It wasn't 10 days. She set the mug down. It was 6 weeks before you arrived and then 3 weeks of pretending. I let that land. 9 weeks is not nothing, she said. I'm not saying it answers everything. I'm saying it's not nothing. No, it's not. We sat with that for a moment. Then she said, tell me what you actually want. Not what's reasonable, what you want. I looked at her across a camp table in a cabin in the Oregon woods, with a lake outside the window that glowed in the dark, and I said, more time, more mornings on the dock. I want to find out what this is when we're not both pretending it isn't anything. And I'm scared of wanting that, because Friday Harbor is not Portland, and I've already had one relationship end because I couldn't become a different person. I'm not asking you to become a different person. I know. I reached across the table. She looked at my hand for a second before she took it, but I needed to say it out loud so you'd understand what I was working through last night. Something shifted in her face, not forgiveness exactly. That word was too formal for what it was. More like recognition. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, I understand. And I'm still here. She squeezed my hand once, Drink your coffee before it gets cold. The next 10 days became something I still think of as their own separate thing, compressed and bright, the way certain stretches of time are. We stopped pretending on the dock. She showed me her data, hours of it, graphs of dinoflagellate distribution and temperature correlation, and explained what it meant for her dissertation with the same focus she brought to everything. I helped her replace a faulty latch on the dock gate. She made me walk the lake trail without my phone and declared it a medical intervention. Your cardiologist would back me up, she said. My cardiologist thinks I'm lying down in a dim room. Is that working? I'm walking a trail with a field ecologist who's trying to cure me with nature. Is it working? I looked at the lake through the trees. Afternoon light dappled on the water, and thought about the last time I had genuinely stopped moving. Yeah, I said. A little. She stopped to examine something on a fern leaf. I watched her. The careful way she handled the notebook, the way she narrated her observations quietly to herself when she thought I wasn't listening. I had been paying close attention to her for 3 weeks, and hadn't let myself acknowledge what that meant until a lake full of glowing water made it impossible to pretend otherwise. You're staring, she said without looking up. I'm observing. There's a distinction. The distinction matters to you. Deeply. She smiled at the fern. On the last night before she drove back to Corvallis, we sat on the dock until 2 a.m. and the lake dark below. The bloom had faded after the third night, as she'd predicted. She told me about growing up in Maine, summers on the water, the specific quality of Atlantic fog rolling in off the coast. I told her about the Q3 presentation, the conference room floor, the mindfulness pamphlet I had never opened. She laughed in a way that made me feel less stupid about it. For what it's worth, she said, you seem considerably less like someone about to have a cardiac event than you did 3 weeks ago. You cured me with bad coffee and bioluminescence. It's a growing treatment methodology. The air was cool and smelled like pine resin and water. Her shoulder was against mine. I'd been careful all night, and then somewhere around 1 a.m. I stopped being careful and put my arm around her, and she leaned into my side with the easy naturalness of something we'd been doing for years. I'll call when I get to Corvallis, she said. I'll answer. You say that now. Dara! I tilted my head to look at her. When have I said something I didn't mean? She considered that seriously. Never, actually. So. She turned her face up and kissed me. Not for the first time that week, but the way it landed felt different than the others. Heavier, shaped by the hour and the leaving and the particular bravery required to start something you don't know how to finish. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against my cheek. I'm scared of this, she said quietly. Not of you, of how much I'll mind the distance. Me too. You won't pretend it's fine when it isn't. No, will you? No. We sat there until the stars began to thin at the edges of the sky, and then we went to sleep. Separately, in separate cabins, which felt both right and absurd, a choice that had its own kind of patience in it. She drove away at 9 in the morning with her sample kits and her data hard drive and the camp stove she had defended all summer. I watched from the porch. She stopped the car at the end of the gravel road and waved once out the window. I waved back. Then the trees took her. I stayed at the cabin for another 2 weeks because that was what I had booked. And because I found, to my genuine surprise, that I didn't want to leave, I hiked. I finished a book. I slept 8 hours a night and let my heart do whatever hearts do when they're not under deadline pressure. I called my cardiologist, and he said my resting rate had improved significantly and that I should keep up whatever I was doing. The nature thing? He asked. And some other things, I said. Dara called the night she got back to Corvallis, and we talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. 3 times the following week. I drove down to visit in October, stayed at a motel near campus, met 2 of her dissertation committee members at a coffee shop, and held her hand for exactly 3 hours and 40 minutes during her defense. I know the time because she'd given me the window and I watched the clock. When she came out of the conference room with a slightly stunned look and said they passed it, I said of course they did, and she hugged me hard enough that I felt it in my ribs. She accepted the Friday Harbor position. The Marine Station was a serious institution on a small island in the San Juans, accessible by ferry, and it was exactly the kind of postdoc that put you on the faculty track. I watched her face when she talked about the role and understood there was no version of this where I asked her not to go. "Come visit me in Portland before you go north," I said. She came for a long weekend. We spent most of it doing ordinary things in a way that didn't feel ordinary at all. The grocery store, a Sunday morning where she sat across from me at my kitchen table, reading her field notes while I read structural specs, and neither of us felt the need to fill the quiet. She looked up once and caught me looking at her, and instead of pretending she hadn't noticed, she smiled and went back to her notes. I drove her to the airport on a Monday morning. In the drop-off lane, she kissed me and said, "Portland to Friday Harbor is not that far if you think about it in terms of effort rather than miles. Is that ecology logic? That's Dara logic." I laughed. She got out, and I watched her through the windshield until the sliding doors closed behind her. Long distance is not what love stories advertise. It is a rescheduled video call because her water sampling ran late. It is me texting at 11 p.m. because I forgot the time difference when she's in the field. It is one weekend per month we both protect like infrastructure, non-negotiable, load-bearing. It is harder than the cabin was, and the cabin was not exactly simple. But every time she flies back from Friday Harbor, she texts me her gate number, and I am at arrivals when she comes through. And the expression on her face when she sees me is the same one she had when she turned to show me the glowing water. Some things do not change with distance. That is either the point or the whole argument. At 7 months, I told my firm I was considering a position in Corvallis. My supervisor asked if I was being poached. I said no. He asked why Corvallis. I said personal reasons. He told me the firm would be sorry to lose me, which I appreciated, and I told him I was genuinely glad to have been there, which was true. I called Dara. "Why are you looking at Corvallis firms?" she asked. "Because Friday Harbor is a postdoc, not a permanent position, and Corvallis is your home institution. The math isn't complicated. You don't have to." I know I don't. I leaned back in my chair and looked out my apartment window at the Portland skyline, which I had never loved as much as I was supposed to. "I'm not following you. I've thought about this separately. I'm choosing a direction and it happens to be the same direction you're in." She was quiet for a moment. "That's an important distinction," she said finally. "The distinction matters to me." I heard the smile in her voice when she answered, "Deeply." 1 year after that, Tuesday night in August, I drove back to Crater Hollow Lake. Dara was finishing her first year at the Marine Station and had a week between field projects. The property management company had both cabins available. We rented them both and used one. On the third night, she woke me at 10:30 with her hand on my shoulder. "It's starting," she said. We walked the trail without a flashlight. I knew the routes by now. At the North Beach, the water was glowing at the edges again, that same cold blue-green light pulsing with the current, the same breath-like quality, exactly as it had been the year before. Dara set up her sample kit with the efficiency of someone who had done it 100 times. I sat on the flat rock above the waterline and watched both the lake and her. When she finished, she walked over and stood beside me, looking at the water for a long moment without speaking. "Same as last year," she said. "Better," I said. She looked at me. "Last year I didn't know what was going to happen," I said. "This year, I'm here on purpose." She sat down beside me on the rock, close enough that her shoulder pressed into mine, and looked out at the lake that was still doing the thing that looked like dreaming. She didn't say anything for a while. Neither did I. The water moved and the light moved with it, and the pines stood still around us, and there was nothing I needed to resolve or brace for or figure out before I let myself feel it. She took my hand. I held on.